Dr. Sabrina Chakori is joining us today. She's a postdoctoral researcher at the CSIRO, Australia's National Science Agency. She's an educator and a multi-award-winning social entrepreneur. She's committed to building a socially just and ecologically sustainable society. And her research has focused on degrowth, how we can shift away from consumerism and promote sustainable practices in areas like food systems and circular models. With more than 17 years of experience, Sabrina has led many collaborations around the world, including a project with Queensland's Environment Minister to help implement the law that banned single-use plastic bags. And in 2017, she took her research a step further by starting the Brisbane Tool Library. It's a community initiative. And BTL is unique in Australia as it operates out of the state library in Queensland. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but going based off of what we had. But of course, you know, we all know the benefits of tool libraries. If you're in this session, you made it this far, you probably get that. Sabrina has received many awards for her efforts, including, and I'm not going to mince, there's probably more here, but the Way Smart Brisbane City Council Award in 2023, Create Change for 7 News Young Achiever Award in 2020, Emerging Female Leader Bursary from the National Council of Women of Queensland in 2020. And she's the co-founder of the Degrowth Journal, which promotes ideas about sustainable living, knowledge sharing. Additionally, she's part of the Planetary Health Equity Hothouse program in the Australian National University and is Associate Fellow in the Post-Growth Institute. And somehow there's probably more to that, which is just amazing. I'll let her share on that, but I'm happy to know her and share this planet with her. When I grow up, I hope to be half as amazing as she is. But please welcome Dr. Sabrina Chakori.
Thank you, Amanda. So I will try to share my slides.
Yeah.
Should work.
Oh, we got your Zoom. Yes, there we go.
All right, perfect. So hi, good afternoon, good evening. Yeah.
It looks like it's in the presenter mode. I don't know if there's a way to zoom it to just the.
Let me see. Let me retry. Share.
I'll be sharing a different window.
Let me try again. Is it still on? Is now good?
Yep. If you make yes, there we go.
Yeah. All right. Perfect. Yeah. Good afternoon and good evening wherever you are. Thanks, Amanda, for that not necessary too long presentation and biography. Yeah, I come to you today from 2 perspectives, as an academic, but also as a practitioner. As Amanda mentioned, I do work, volunteer in a tool library, but my main income comes from being a researcher at the National Science Agency. And I thought today to have this journey with you about the political and economic role that tool libraries and other projects might have in society. But before starting with that, I usually like to begin thinking about this question. How could we create an unsustainable society? Depleting natural resources? Yeah. Creating a working poor class? Yes. Keeping unemployment? Yes. Creating increasing hunger, and we know that since COVID trends are going up, but at the same time having also all other kind of problem related to malnutrition, such as obesity. Yeah, we're on doing that as well. Losing biodiversity, polluting waters, polluting lands. So if this was our list of things to do, unfortunately, we would really be on track with it. And that's scary. And that's why today I'm here talking about rethinking the proper economic system. In the 70s, many researchers came up with important publication, including this one, Limits to Grow, that warned us about the unsustainable trends that we were on. And 20 years later, we had the first climate summit in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro. And that's up there, that's me. And I like to put, and think about my positionality. And why is that? Is because I still think, in political debates, in the media, etc., that climate change and, environmental degradation is a problem that future generations are going to face, and we have to do something for future generation. But that is just a way that these actors use to postpone, solutions and the problem itself. Because I consider myself already that generation who inherited a planet that is sick with all the social and ecological degradation. So if we put in perspective, the inefficient response that we had so far, that calls upon even more urgency in finding solutions right now. I don't know if some of you might be familiar with the planetary boundaries framework, but basically these studies are showing that, from land degradation again to pollution of freshwater system, the ecological trends are really worrying. And they did an updated study back in 2023. And again, they write, the authors of this paper, that this study might serve as a renewed wake-up call to humankind. The Earth is in danger. And they also point out that potential opportunities to shift away from the unsustainable socioeconomic system we live in. But before understanding which kind of potential new economic system we have, it's important to understand, and today I won't make justice to that, but briefly, how the current economic system works. So we live in a growth-driven capitalist economic system. And so far, we continue to equate so-called prosperity with GDP growth. So with the increase of the gross domestic product. GDP is an indicator that measures all market transactions. So every time we buy or sell a service or a good, GDP capture that exchange. However, GDP doesn't capture many other things. So as I might guess, many of you volunteer for Tool Libraries, repair cafes, and other projects. GDP doesn't account for volunteer work. It doesn't account for care work. It doesn't give any information about the distribution of wealth in society. Let's take an example. If we produce a polluting product, that increases GDP. If we sell it, that increases GDP. If we have to clean up after a big corporation just polluted our environment, that increases GDP. And we keep thinking and hearing from, for example, the media or the political discourse around the world that, our economy is not growing fast enough. Our GDP went up just by 1 or 2%. We need to grow the economy. So I always suggest to people, if you want to contribute to the growth of your economy, then you can get a divorce. Divorces increase GDP. You can get a car accident because, you making, a car accident, having to repair your car, going through the medical system, that increases GDP. Again, polluting, as I said, increases. So when we understand that this is how we measure and understand prosperity in our modern economies, it's really worrying. And this is like a well-established problem that I will explain further later. But so to stimulate the economic growth and therefore GDP, we came up in society with all kinds of economic mechanisms. For example, intra-industry trade. It doesn't matter if you can't see the image here, because a loop diagram that was part of my PhD, where I looked at packaged food, and I also looked at intra-industry trade. What is in the intra-industry trade is basically the fact that we have a globalized economy, and in many cases we import and export exactly the same products. So the US imports beef from Argentina and exports beef to Europe. And globalization brought also many benefits around the world, but should we rethink globalization as a need-based globalization rather than just a system that is there to circulate products? So, for example, we also have products that get produced on one side of the world and get washed in another side of the world, like apples, and get waxed in another country yet. So, you know, inter-industry trade and globalization in general is, you know, leading to increased transport and therefore all the ecological problems that go with that. Another mechanism that we came up with as a society, that the growth-driven economy came up with, is planned obsolescence. Since the 70s and the 80s, industrial designers started to learn to design a product that they would break down. And as you also know, this is a very problematic aspect in our society, not only because it leads to e-waste, and we know that, you know, we are not treating and disposing of e-waste properly. Often we also ship it to global south countries that have less infrastructure to deal with it. But yeah, planned obsolescence is there to push consumers to replace more often their products, to increase sales, to increase profits for companies, and therefore to increase that GDP at the end at a macro scale. So these are all what I would say obsolete a mechanism that we came up with to keep expanding productivism and consumerism. This is a more recent report of the UN, the Global Resource Outlook of 2024. Again, as they say, the message from this report could not be clearer. It's no longer whether transformation toward global sustainable resource consumption and production is necessary, but how urgently can we make it happen? And they alert us again that if we do not change our current economic system, we could see resource use going up by 60% from just 2020 level. Looking at 2026. So again, you know, the science is there, the information is there. However, you know, we live in this growth-driven economy where no matter how many resources we consume, we never seem to have enough. And as Raj Patel wrote, the perpetual quest for economic growth has turned humankind into an agent of extinction. And let me just go back to the economic growth and the GDP itself. The problem is not GDP per se. That's an indicator. We have it. We can use it to measure things. The problem is that growth and the correlated indicator became an end, you know, it became a policy objective and not just an indicator there to measure our economic transaction. And that's until here. Again, I just gave some snapshot of the situation in terms of ecological degradation. But we have to understand that the current growth-driven economy also leads to increased inequities, inequalities. Some literature, including some UN documents, talk about climate apartheid, meaning that those countries that contributed the most to greenhouse gases emission and ecological degradation are also the richest countries or individuals within countries that can insulate themselves from the effect of climate change. While, as we saw recently as well at the COP29 and in other forums, those who have contributed the less are also the ones having to take the burden of the impacts of climate change. So this idea of should we make the cake bigger, as neoclassical economics told us taught us in schools, or should we share the cakes and, you know, the problems, responsibility, and the benefits? I won't go into this, but I just wanted to flag it. So there's the paradox of well-being, because it could be claimed that economic growth and indeed capitalism brought to many benefits, and it did in some ways. But there are studies that show, and again, I'm happy to share the slides and the references. Doesn't matter if you can't see properly the image, but this is Tim Jackson. He wrote Prosperity Without Growth, and he shows that basically there is a link, there is a correlation between increase in wealth, increase in GDP per capita, and what they call life satisfaction or happiness. But that arrives until like $15,000 US per year. This is an old figure. The book down there, Global Handbook of Quality of Life, shows as well that there's a weak correlation between increased income and reported happiness in rich countries. And in fact, both of these publication, for example, looks at the US, which technically is one of the richest countries in terms of GDP in the world, but then the life satisfaction and happiness has plateaued or even decreased. So these studies, they simply show us that there isn't a direct relationship always between increasing income or GDP at the national level and well-being. But one could argue, yes, but the growth-driven economy help us to tackle poverty, right? That's proven. And here again, a new report of the UN just published in July this year. And I will just read what they wrote, and I invite you to read the entire report if poverty issues are of your interest. But they write, an increase in gross domestic product is not a precondition for the realization of human rights or for combating poverty and inequality. Then they go on saying, as long as the economy is driven mainly by profit maximization, it will respond to the demand expressed by the richest groups of society, leading to extractive forms of production that worsen social exclusion in the name of creating more wealth, and it will fail to fulfill the rights of those in poverty. So we are seeing, that the growth-driven economic causes also power relationship, problematic power relationship between the global north and the global south. But we have green growth, right? And a lot of the mainstream discourse in sustainability is let's have an inclusive or a green growth. Green growth means, in a nutshell, that we can continue with this economic system, we can continue expanding the economic metabolism, but we're going to do it with more efficient technologies, with better technologies. And this is encapsulated in this idea of eco-efficiency, right? If we're going to have better cars, then we're going to solve the problem. However, there's no proof that green growth is happening. And green growth is based on this idea of relative decoupling, meaning, as I said, that we can continue expanding the economy, but somehow we're going to curb greenhouse gases emission and material footprint because we're going to have better technologies. Again, I know the image is not visible, but all the studies that looked at relative decoupling show that there is no relative decoupling happening. So as the economy expands, emissions are going up and the material footprint is also going up. So not only there are no proof that relative decoupling is working, but there's no evidence that it could even work at a required speed for us to remain below the 1.5 or 2 degrees. The main critique of green growth is also described in what we call the Jevon paradox, which means that even if we have more efficient technologies that uses less resources and energy, if the goal of the economy is to continue expand productivism and consumerism, that's the goal, then we're gonna offset the gains that the technology gave us. In fact, some could argue that the growth-driven capitalist system has never been against doing more with less. And so that's where we have to rethink, the goal of the economy itself and not just the technological advances in it. So this is a paper published by Kotz and team in Nature, and they looked at the cost of climate damages, and they accounted for 38 trillion per year by 2050. In a nutshell, they write again, the damages are already considerably larger than mitigation cost, and some other scholars might say that the economic growth became uneconomic, meaning that the cost of this system is actually exceeding the benefits. Another problem with green growth and this obsession with technocratic eco-modernist solutions, so solution based on technology alone, is that, as you might know, we will require more and more of these so-called critical materials. This is, again, a paper published in Nature Sustainability, but by some researchers at the University of Queensland here in Australia. And they looked at where those critical materials are in the world. They looked at the first 30 more required critical materials, and they showed that more than a half of those minerals and metals are located on indigenous land or peasant lands. And they emphasized that in indigenous land that hasn't been destroyed yet from previous economic activities. And they also, again, remind us that, as we expand the commodity frontiers, those frontiers where we go and incorporate more and more materials into global supply chain, we're going to have, more destruction of cultural heritage, of communities, land grabbing, and all those social costs that those communities living there might have to pay. So globally, it took many years to agree that we live in the Anthropocene, meaning that human action are influencing Earth systems, and that's true. However, I prefer to use the definition of Jason Moore, talking about the Capitalocene, the age of capital, because if we talk about the Anthropocene, it implies that we all have same responsibility, that all humans' action are impacting the planet, but we know that, Australians and Americans have a much higher ecological footprint than other nations. So by talking about the Capitalocenes, we integrate into the understanding of our system that we are organized in specific socioeconomic systems. We don't just wake up in the morning and do whatever we want. We are embedded into a system that has a purpose, and that purpose is to grow infinitely. So what can we do about all of this? Well, if we look at sustainability transition studies, there are different ways of defining weak and strong sustainability. There are different frameworks. I like to use this one from Tiffany Morrison, and team look at transition from a palliative end. So the palliative aspect of transition is, again, this technological fixation of these unproven, for example, carbon and capture and storage technologies. And they invite us to look at the deep radical, deep transition end, where they say we have to look at the root driver of the deterioration, and we should think about overturning, capitalist, exploitative, and extractivist systems. And they suggest degrowth and post-growth as a way forward. What is degrowth or post-growth? I'm going to use them interchangeably here. Is basically the acknowledgement that we can't expand the economy forever if we live in a planet with limited resources. It's basically acknowledging from, biophysical perspective that endless growth is unsustainable and undesirable. More specifically, degrowth can be defined as an equitable downscaling of production and consumption that increases human well-being and ecological condition at the local, global level in short and long term. Degrowth basically just calls for prioritizing socio-ecological well-being before profit maximization and growth. Another important aspect of the degrowth literature is that it points out that the overgrown economies at the global north are those that have to downscale, so that if we downscale our economic metabolism, then we can allow resources and for others to develop their countries. So degrowth calls for a re-examination of the current economic system, basically. There are many books and that appeared in the last decades, and as well academic articles, but not only. The Harvard Business Review is also talking about degrowth. The CNN is also exploring it, the World Economic Forum. So it's time to jump on this debate, I think, and at least explore which alternative, which opportunities and limits a new economic system could have. Other studies, I might not go in details into them, but again, they use, for example, the same modeling that the IPCC reports of the UN adopted, and they created some degrowth scenarios, and they write that degrowth scenarios minimize many key risks for feasibility and sustainability compared to technology-driven pathways, and they also acknowledge that we still have challenges in terms of political feasibility. But more practically, how can we start even thinking or applying degrowth or post-growth. Part of my research currently at CSIRO looks at post-growth entrepreneurship. Here just put some academic papers. Again, I know that unfortunately we live in a society where we commodify knowledge, so a lot of these academic papers are behind paywalls and you can't even access them. But if you're interested, please reach out to me and I would be happy to share them. So how can we organize businesses or rethink businesses within degrowth? And this is part of my work, and I will talk about it a bit later. There are other pieces of work that look at how can we think about food systems and degrowth. How can we, for example, in my PhD research, I was looking at reducing food packaging and packaged food. And one potential solution would be actually to tackle time poverty, because we live in a society where everyone is time poor, and so there's the tendency of buying, you know, packaged, frozen, or, you know, processed food just because it's more convenient. But people try their best. It's the constraints of the system that often influences our own actions. So to reduce packaged food, for example, reducing globalization or tackling time poverty could be more systemic solution that, you know, improved recycling systems. However, changing the macroeconomic system feels overwhelming, you know, and difficult to grasp at times. Changing individual, you know, lifestyles is important, but often, again, is not sufficient. Or we can also feel overwhelmed by that, right? We don't have time to make our own shampoo and cycle and do our own, you know, amend our own clothes, etc. And that's why I focused back in 2017. I was interested in the meso level. What can we do as communities that we can't do as individuals? And that's what led me to start understanding the commons and then to found the Brisbane Tool Library. I won't go into the details of what a tool library is, because probably most of you either know what tool libraries are or you're going to be exposed during this summit. But yeah, over the years, we had people borrowing all kinds of items. We rescue items from landfill. Why tool libraries fit within this degrowth view is that tool libraries help dematerialize the economy by obviously sharing. And there are two important aspects. So when we think about degrowth or post-growth, often the fear, the critique is like, oh, if we shift away from the growth-driven capitalist system, we're going to have to go back and live in caves, you know, or like give up some kind of luxury that we achieved over years. But that's not true. The tool libraries are a good example of degrow aligned or degrow labs. So people don't own the things. You know, we prioritize as tool librarian access over ownership. So people don't own the things, but they still access the experience. Actually, if nothing all, they even access more experience than if they own things. In fact, tool libraries, not only they help reducing the material consumption of communities, but potentially, as I wrote in 2 book chapters, they might even be hubs to reduce inequalities in urban centers, because we give access to even more people that maybe before couldn't access those items. The other thing about the commons are not about the things, it's not about the tools or the asset. The commons is because a group of humans comes together and has a plan. And that plan is way bigger than the asset themselves. So degrowth and tool library invite us to reevaluate human relationship and resource use. And they do this by constraining consumption without reducing the use right. And this is really, really powerful, because tool libraries are really a prefiguration of the future, of how businesses could develop in the future. So today I wanted also to highlight how we don't need just technological innovation, but we need innovation in social and political structure, and we need to, you know, set up different values and objectives in our society if we do indeed want to reshape our economic system, and we have to do that through the collective agency that we have. This is not a narcissistic slide, but this is just to show that our Brisbane Tool Library had a lot of media coverage over the years. And I think that one aspect of that is not the Tool Library itself as a, you know, as a model, but is because we elevated that political discourse higher up. We have in our website, a mention of which economic system we want. And I think that, although our operations are limited and based just in Brisbane, and we can have just a limited impact in that sense, having that political broader vision and voice it is more important in order to amplify our impact elsewhere. So Degrowth call us from thinking about from shifting away from relative decoupling, think about absolute decoupling. So how can we reduce in absolute term resource use? Degrowth invite us from shifting the conversation from waste to disposability. Waste is how things and materials are removed from the economy, to think about disposability and how and why things enter the economy. From dispossession to possession, a relationship with things. There's a book called Curing Affluenza here, published in Australia. They talk about materialism and consumerism. They say we should all be more materialistic, because being materialistic means loving the materials, loving things, keeping them in circulation, repairing them, etc. While consumerism is the love of buying things, is the thrill. So they call, in this book, they say we should be all more materialistic and less consumeristic. Degrowth also call for changes from consumerism to productivism, because if we focus just on consumerism, we're going to keep blaming people. We're going to keep, putting all the responsibility with this neoliberal way on individuals, and individuals as the main core of a change, while we know that we live in a productivist system that shapes our choices and our lifestyle. Again, we should think about not only efficiency, for example, technological efficiency, but about sufficiency. So how can we plan the contraction of the economy? And we should, of course, improve materials and technology, but we also have to consider the importance of changing social relationships and structure. Back to, thinking about, okay, these business models like tool libraries and others are doing their best to, transform the economy. But we know that these are niches, and they can't overcome the systemic challenges that we face. And we know that we face many challenges running, for example, tool libraries. So we have to think about how we can also change the systemic barriers that are impeding these niches to thrive. And one, barrier to that is the fact that we live in as I said, a growth-driven economic system that will always continue to lead attention and wealth and resources to businesses that are profit-driven. So the UN Secretary General, acknowledges that we're destroying nature, but we count it as an increased wealth. And so many other scholars, and including some politicians, realize that by keeping our economy based on GDP growth, we skew decision-making and policy development toward short-term profit over long-term prosperity. So we really need to engage with these beyond GDP systems. And around the world, there's the Wellbeing Alliance doing that. There are some governments like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Scotland that are exploring beyond GDP system. Beyond GDP system means, looking at alternative metrics, indicators, and system. How can we look at, fairness and political participation or connection and all these other elements? I won't go into detail today. Again, there's this paper by Nick Fitzpatrick. He looked at degrowth policies, and they suggest caps on resources or ecological tax reform, or looking, for example, at work or labor changes. Can we have a minimum income and a maximum income in countries? Would that help reshaping how our economy works? Another, for example is, as I said, we live in a productivist economy, and advertisement is a big part of that. And, if you go into an economic course, at school, at university, they tell you that humans are rational beings and they take rational decisions. If in that same university you go in a marketing course, they're going to tell you humans are irrational completely and we can influence them. So the UN Secretary General, for example, calls for a ban in advertisement from fossil fuels. but some other studies in this area, yes, they look at freedom of expression of, for example, private company, but what about the freedom of reception? And, we should have less advertisement of goods that are not needed in public spaces. And again, a report in 2014 stated that states should protect people from undue levels of commercial advertising and marketing while increasing the space for not-for-profit expression. So these are macro changes that we have to fight, I think, together in order to see some transition to sustainability in the future.
I just wanted to say real quick, Sabrina, just like one more minute if you can wrap up for us. Okay, thank you.
I'm at the end.
Perfect.
So there is a political capture. We know that there are groups and lobbies that are slowing down the changes that are required. This is present in another UN report. And I will just finish up with the fact that we need to think about, moving from scarcity to abundance, and that's what Tool Library do. We need to bring this change in coalitions, in organized groups, so that we can rethink the social fabric of our society. And this quote of Graeber's invites us to stop thinking about the revolution as a thing, the revolution, the greater cataclysm, and instead ask what is revolutionary action. Revolutionary action is any collective action which rejects and therefore confronts some form of power, domination, and in doing so, it reconstitutes social relationships. So Degrowth invites us to do changes by design and not by disaster. And that's an image of Spain a few weeks ago. But in the US, you also had many hurricanes. So how can we, plan to transition? And my really last message is we need to unlearn a lot from the current economic system. We need to probably socialize new ideas of, new paradigms. And then we need to get organized as groups. Because another word is possible, and I think our biggest responsibility, and this is just my thought on that we need to keep alive the idea of a non-capitalist society. And as long as we will keep that imaginary counterpower existing, then we have some hope to reshape the economy. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. There's a lot of great conversation in the chat, and I don't know if I can attempt to summarize it. You did address quite a few points as they came up, so I appreciate your thoroughness. But I mean, the things that always stick with me are like, there's no silver bullet. There's not one solution. There's not one answer. There's not buying an electric car or starting the tool library. That's going to be the thing, and it's can't be dependent on simple or creative innovations. We can't wait for people to, engineer us out of problems, right? But there was conversation around valuation changes and capital changes, and I happened to be on a podcast a few weeks ago talking about like how resale is rental was the hot topic that came up. But then I thought about it more, and all purchases are rental. Nothing except for maybe food, where you're not going to be having it, forever. You only just are with all of the purchases you make for some time. And then to understand how those valuations can change. So there was a lot of talk about, time capital and the education capital or disparities and things to business specific questions. And I don't know if you want to just, give a hot take on what the right place to start, or, in my mind, that's how we can govern to make decisions, is when we have the information and the perspective to make those decisions. But do you have thoughts?
Well, I think, probably I'm talking to people that are already engaged here, but I think, no matter what we do, I think we have to do it as a collective. So really rethinking communities, let that be decentralized, community-owned renewable energy, or, shared transport, or anything that community do together. And that's, I think it's important not only to shape our, consumption behaviors, but also to keep alive really this idea that, humans have always organized themselves in non-market, non-capitalist ways. And if we can keep doing that, then, when I speak about the tool library around Australia, they see that it's an existing example. It might not be perfect. We have lots of barriers, but so I think that people hear that, well, just by joining this summit probably is a good beginning, but then let not leave these talks as a talk, but, join your current community if it exists, and otherwise start one.
I definitely have had a lot of conversation today and in the past few months about coalition building, because especially in America, there's a lot of disjointedness, we can say kindly. The other thing I think is interesting, I recently did a class on power dynamics in waste, and I think that that's something we really don't we take for granted. And I appreciate that maybe most about learning about degrowth in the past several years is the 70% of global resources are used by 1 billion people, and 1% of people use 1% of people. 1% of resources are used by 1.2 billion people, right? Like that's the thing that sticks with me, is the same amount of people use 1% versus 70%. And that's a huge disparity. And we don't talk about that enough when we look at solutions and look at the way that we are engineering our way into more problematic situations. But
yeah, no, absolutely. And, I spoke about, differences between countries, but we see the same within, countries. And the US is probably a great example of seeing these increased inequalities happening. So I think we all have a big responsibility, and we can't do everything all the time, but we can see which privilege we have and leverage that privilege to, free up those who don't have it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, there was also conversation about access and the disparity between access to cheap, or, Walmart is the largest employer of Americans. And I was recently reading an interesting book, Heather Ritchie's Not the End of the World. And it, sort of says, no, not degrowth either, not this, not that. But it does talk about very similar things where you look at the inequities, you look at the impact versus the contributing factors, and you can't help but see that this is a huge swath. And there are arguments that the global south does contribute to pollution, and there are arguments that there's atrophies to like production would impact them through like manufacturing changes and things. But re-evaluating things like GDP and degrowth can facilitate this too. And I think that that's important for people to understand about the approach, that this is not just taking the rug out from underneath everyone. This is about building the system better.
No, absolutely. And you were talking about Walmart, and I never lived in the US, not of the US. But we also have to keep in mind that in parallel to this big corporation, in particular in the US, you also have, some of them leading cooperatives and social movements, right?
Absolutely,
and I think that not definitely forget that. And when people say, oh, but at least the capitalist system led to good jobs and so on and so on. There's Jason Hickel that wrote Less is More book and many other pieces, and he says all what we achieved under the growth-driven capitalist system is thanks to social movement and union and protest. No one gave workers their rights and conditions spontaneously. We fought for that. And I think that unfortunately, this is a personal thing, not based on any literature, with the social media changing our behavior, we feel that sharing a post or liking something, that's enough, and we forgot that we need to reclaim public spaces, either for social movements or for tool libraries or for any other kind of project. So I think that now more than ever we need to relearn how to reorganize our society.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, just figure out how to reorganize this, but it's a starting point. And that's, where I think we wanted to land here, and I know we're probably over time. Actually, I put down the schedule, so Cami, interrupt me if we need to wrap up. But
You're way
you know,
over
we all
time.
yeah, we all just wanted to know. We all want to know where to start or where to take the next steps. And I think keeping in mind a lot of what the larger implications or the larger possibilities even can be more what, you know, curing. I wrote down the curing affluenza. I forgot about this. And like the idea of curing sort of our malaise, we get a little stuck. We are in this space already, and we think, well, maybe, you know, we could do something different, but really making the best situation we can for our space too. So, all right, that's all I wanted to say, but I will let you have the closing final thoughts and maybe just centering on like where to start sort of momentum.
Sure. I mean, I know this is, you know, a lot of big, big concept and big things in a short moment. But look, I really think specifically looking at makers movement and tool libraries, etc., which is, I guess, is the majority of people here today, that we really need to adopt more a political view, a long-term view together, because, you know, otherwise we're going to be always one step behind the status quo, right? Yes, we are repairing our toasters, and yes, we are managing this waste, but if we are not also fighting productivism, you know, to begin with, then we're going to always remain this marginal niche, nice community, you know, project existing, but we will not see stuff shifting properly. So probably a call to all, you know, kind of people in this area for future years is how can we actually have a proper political view, and that political view might be different, but at least it might be different from the status quo today, right? So I think elevating that discussion beyond just repairing the immediate materiality of things we have is really important.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And I know there was more comment and chat in the chat there. So